Good morning, and welcome to Austin, and welcome to McCombs. I hope you have a wonderful day today, and it's my pleasure to speak to you. I think we have a great lineup. So I'm going to talk to you today about the world being flat, and is it flat? I'm actually, by the way, I'm a master's in physics, so it's kind of odd for me to come out here and say the world is flat, because sort of ignoring 700 years of knowledge that we have. But nonetheless, I'm going to sort of go ahead and do it. And I have about 45 minutes to speak. And what I'm going to probably do is try to speak for about 35 minutes or so and open up 10 minutes to any Q&As that you folks might have. That's going to be my talk today. And I want to start with something that you probably all have seen in the newspapers. And what's happened really in the last 36 to 48 hours. There's been some big excitement around something that maybe many of us in this room don't use. And that's been the acquisition of a company called WhatsApp by Facebook, right? So we've been sort of reading all this. And just for some context, I want to start with that. And you might wonder what the connection is to the world is flat. And we'll see what the connection is. So here was this company called WhatsApp, which was acquired by Facebook for $19 billion. And this is the largest tech acquisition that has taken place. The previous one was Google acquiring Motorola for $11 billion. Microsoft acquired Skype for $8.5 billion. And here is this company called WhatsApp, which is a text messaging service acquired by Facebook, right? And I wondered what was going on. It's like, okay, what's going on? $19 billion. We think, Mark Zuckerberg is very smart. He clearly knows what he's doing, created a lot of wealth. So he's paid $19 billion for a text messaging service. Surely he has the programming capacity within Facebook to do this kind of text messaging service. Facebook probably already has some text messaging service. I'm not on Facebook because my children don't want to be my friends. So the only two people who want to be friends with me are my father and my husband. I'm not kidding, actually. It's true. And so I just decided to protest, and I said I'm not going to be on Facebook. So I don't really know that much about Facebook in terms of what's I read it as an academic, but just I'm just boycotting Facebook. But here's what's happening, right? So here's WhatsApp being acquired. So let me sort of tell you some storylines about what's going on, right? So nobody really knows. I'm not pretending to know what Mark Zuckerberg really is thinking about, but there are some hypotheses. I'm sorry you can't see that, but I'll tell you what the text is on this. So there are various hypotheses about what's going on, right? The first thing is that basically WhatsApp has 500 million users, and they are signing up 1 million users every day, okay? And I don't know if you know what the size of Facebook is. It's about, I think, 1.2 billion or 1.3. So if they were a country, let's call them Facebookistan, what would happen is China, India, and then Facebook would be the third largest country in the world. So Facebook is no small community, right? So what are they trying to do? They're trying to acquire, they've acquired WhatsApp. And one of the hypotheses is that this text messaging service has grown dramatically in India, China, Latin America, and Europe, right? And so these are markets where Facebook has not had the kind of entry that they have given, that they're a US sort of centric company. So this might be, and I'd be happy in the Q&A section if you have some other examples of this, the first time I see a US company really acquiring a technology company. This is one hypothesis, right? We don't know what else. The other hypothesis, when I was talking to my MBA class yesterday, was Facebook was going to acquire WhatsApp and then destroy the application, because this is a good way to acquire competition and destroy competition. And they have a lot of money, and they can do that, right? So here's a company that has wide technology adoption in markets outside the US, and a US company is willing to sort of play the game there. So this is sort of an interesting dynamic, and will sort of set the stage for what I want to talk to you about today. Some of these ideas that I'm going to talk to you about are not necessarily, heretic, or they're not new. They've been ideas that have been floating around, and I'll sort of try to give you a framework to think about what's happening. And one number, or two numbers that I want to have you think about while we are discussing this, is 325 million and 7 billion, okay? That's going to undergird my presentation. What are those two numbers, anyone? The population of the United States and world population. And I think that's an interesting dynamic that is sort of driving companies' choices. The other point that I want to make here is you might have seen recently that emerging markets are not quite what they've been made out to be, right? I mean, we've seen currency problems, we've seen economic issues, social issues, every problem that can plague a country and an economy has happened. So there is a long-term secular trend, and then there may be some short-term bumps. And I'm not someone who can predict the future, but I think it's sort of interesting to think about what these opportunities and threats are, especially from a marketing angle. So my sort of presentation today is going to be primarily driven from what it means for marketing. What I want to do in the first part of my talk is to talk about, and this is built off Tom Friedman's book. This is an old book, but I think the insights are still interesting and make sense and provide a context, is think about the flatteners. What really made the world flat? What do we mean when we say the world is flat? What's the alternative? The world is, is round. What does round mean? That means there are people at the top and people at the bottom. So there is sort of a, a hierarchy, if you will. And when the flat seems to imply that the hierarchy is coming down, the fact that there's less of a hierarchy. So the first flattener is the collapse of the Berlin Wall. When the walls came down and the windows came up, the event not only symbolized the end of Cold War, it also allowed people from the other side of the wall to join the economic mainstream. If you think about political systems as technologies, so you think about capitalism or communism or socialism as technologies, the technology that has won, it's clearly shown dominance, is capitalism, right? So except barring perhaps maybe North Korea and maybe Cuba, I mean, all countries, and China has its own political system, but they're really capitalist in the way they sort of see how demand works. Let's think about the second flattener, which has been technology, the internet, and the emergence of Netscape. Netscape went public at the price of $28. Some of us remember this. I remember this. And we know what happened since then. It broadened the audience for the internet as a communications medium used primarily by early adopters and geeks to everyone from 5-year-olds to 95-year-olds. The fastest growing group on Facebook today is 65 to 85-year-olds. It's true. It is absolutely true. I mean, what's that? Did you say something? Do you want to share something? If you want to share something, raise your hand, and I'm happy to sort of take it. If not, we'll keep questions for the end, okay? The fastest growing group is the older folks. The internet was actually in existence from 1968 as part of the US military, but really this is what allowed us to have universal access. Digitization, words, files, films, music, and pictures were accessed by people across the world. So this is a technology enabled. So first you have the political system changes, and then you have the technology changing. Flattener 3, workflow software, the ability of machines to talk to other machines with no humans involved. So 50, 60, 100 years ago, you would have people with different languages. They need a translator. Right now, you have a software engineer in Bangalore in India and someone in San Jose. The folks can talk through computer languages. I mean, aside from English, but the real work can happen. There were the emergence of software protocols, which allowed anyone to publish documents that can be transmitted to any computer anywhere. So you see what's happening. There was a political transformation and a technological transformation so that now you have people enabled to collaborate across the world. Uploading. So it's not just collaboration, but a given individual in the community is able to contribute to the conversation by uploading documents at very little effort. Galen was talking about tweeting. If you want to sort of take some of the information here and tweet it out into the world, it is effortless. You can do it on your smartphone. You can probably do it on a not so smartphone either, with a cell phone, without any sort of computing technology. So there's a lot of empowerment happening here again. Remember what a flat world means, that the distance between those at the top and those at the bottom is shrinking in some way or the other. The other flattener has been outsourcing. So there's been, combined with these developing and connecting technologies, companies have looked for ways to reduce costs. Again, I'm going to say 325, 7 billion. And I'm exaggerating. It's not really 7 billion because you could say A substantial portion of the world is living on very low incomes. They're not really available to the marketplace. Maybe it's 2, 3, 4 billion. And even the other 3 billion are aspirational. They want to live like people in Europe and in North America. They allow companies to split service and manufacturing activities into components which can be subcontracted in the most cost-efficient, cost-effective way. So now you have computers that can speak to each other. You have connectivity. And then you had this technology with fiber optic cables with the introduction of the World Wide Web. So you see the world is getting connected. And as the world is getting connected, it's flattening out in the way the information flows. Offshoring. So the internal relocation of a company's manufacturing processes to a foreign land to take advantage of cost savings. There was a time in the last 10 years when Sun Microsystems and IBM were closing facilities in the United States and opening facilities only in markets outside, Ireland, Philippines, India, China, right? What was the sort of the dynamic there? You can get talent, you can get technology, and I can save costs. China's entrance in the World Trade Organization allowed for greater competition. So now China is everybody's manufacturing department. Think of someone like Foxconn. They basically are a production department for every computer company in the world, right? What does it allow you to do? Buy products cheaper. What do cheaper products allow you to do? Serve your customers in developed countries better. But what's more, you can serve the remaining set of billions of customers outside who are looking for much cheaper products. Countries such as India, Malaysia, Mexico, and Brazil must now compete against China and each other to have businesses offshore to them. An interesting development. In the last 6 to 7 years, wages have gone up in China so that China is no longer manufacturing competitive. So very, very interesting dynamic in terms of what's happening with respect to how the world is connected. Think back 60, 70, 80 years ago, the insularity that came from not having technology connecting up made us, in some senses, a more round world. Supply chaining, the planning of logistics without regard to geographies to ensure greatest efficiencies. McDonald's today, apparently in some drive-through outlets, is not having their clerks situated in that outlet, but having them located somewhere else in a remote location where they can take advantage of labor costs. What prevents McDonald's now to have their clerks located in Ireland, Philippines, wherever the cost advantages exist? I'm not sort of at this time, and I'll talk to this a little bit later, I'm not talking about the negative impact something like this has on developed countries. So we do know what's happening in Europe. We know the pain that some sectors have felt in the United States. But if you take a world view of what's happening, it's pretty dramatic. And companies don't really care where their sales are coming from at some level. Last 10 years, if you look at the 10K of companies, publicly listed companies in the United States, and look at the letters to the shareholders from the CEO, the first statement, or the first 3 statements of the CEOs would say the following, something along the lines of, dear shareholders, we've had a great year, or we've had a bad year, and then the next line would be, our markets in China, India, and Brazil are growing or not growing, or we've had a chicken scare, or we've had this. So these markets have become integral to the operation of US companies. Never before in the history of the planet have so many people on their own had the ability to find so much information about so many things, about so many other people. You might argue there is something to the notion that there's too much information. I feel that sometimes. It's like, where do you start? How much do you read? What do you have to keep up with, right? There's a lot of information. I think it's both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because there's a lot more information, so efficiency has sort of increased because we have more information on many things. I think it's a curse in some senses because the quality of the information that gets put up on many of these websites is very suspect. You don't quite know whether this information is true. Anybody can start a web page. Your Wikipedia is not that well audited. So the quality of information becomes suspect, so which means that you can have rumors, the difficulty of sort of challenging what information becomes available. Finally, the steroids. You have all these people connected, you have the ability to upload information, but you need the pipes, the technology to move this information. wireless, voice over internet, and file sharing. You have devices that are becoming more and more powerful. All of this enables connectivity. So the point that I'm sort of trying to make, if you think about it in terms of building blocks, the first building block was the political transformation, and so, 1989, followed by the internet, software technologies, the standardization of language and computing, and finally the hardware that enables all this, right? So on the one hand, this is a terrific opportunity. So now the world is your marketplace. You don't have to worry about the 325 million consumers alone, who probably have many of the things they need. Undoubtedly, the wealthiest market per capita, it's still the big market that everybody wants to play, but you have growing markets outside. The fastest growing markets for BMWs, luxury clothes, is now China and India. India, really. India, I don't know if any of you have been to India. There's no place on the road for cars. Basically, it's clogged. BMW 7 Series, the fastest growth for them last year, the fastest growth markets was in India. So you have sort of a double-edged sword, if you will. So the question is, what does it mean for companies who are looking in this market space? What are the opportunities? What are some threats? And I could really speak to this maybe in a semester class, or at least for about 4 or 5 hours. So I'm going to sort of distill what I think are some things that companies think about as they move in this space. The first sort of view that I'd like to offer is that companies operating in a flat world have to think about what I call the network orchestration imperative. I guess this shows that I'm an academic, because I use 3 big words with lots of consonants in them. So the notion is that you cannot do everything yourself in every country, right? So you need increasing flexibilities, supply chains from the global network. It would be not smart to think that you can really understand what's happening in 160 countries. So you need the idea that the network orchestration is a multiplier, the connection to companies, the connection to people, the connection to organizations in different systems. So the network orchestration is a multiplier. The right product at the right time, right place, and right price. So different tastes, different languages. Interestingly, the world is becoming more homogenized. There is a point of view that says that every time McDonald's opens an outlet, one language dies in the world. It's just a thought. It's something to think about, right? This is probably dramatic, and I don't have facts, and I couldn't tell you if it's 1 language or 5 languages or half a language. But the point that is being made is, as the world gets flat, we are having more democratization, more homogenization. And what better way to get homogenization than brands? So I think about McDonald's as a brand. For many of us in North America, and especially in the United States, McDonald's is not exactly a top of the notch brand, but hey, outside the United States, it has a lot of cachet. It's true. So the point is, this homogenization is happening even as those cultures are heterogeneous. Related to the same notion, there is a point of view, it's not mine, sociologists talk about it, linguists talk about it, that 50, 60, 70 years from now, there'll be 3 languages in the world: English, Spanish, and Mandarin. I don't know if this is true. But you can see what the point that is happening is there's homogenization even as the world is very heterogeneous, right? So terrific opportunities. The fastest growing industry in countries like China and India, schools that teach English, because they say English as a gateway to a job, English as a gateway to a multinational corporation, and English as a way to sort of get them out of the situation that they're in. So right product at the right time, right place, and right price, so which means essentially you're saying, I've got to be there wherever I need to be in order to get my customers. So what are the roles? If you have a network, you have to design and manage these networks. Who do I engage in? Are the incentives lined up? Those countries don't have institutional, legal, and commercial mechanisms that we are used to in the United States and maybe in countries in Europe. You have to control even as you empower the network, and you have to create value through integration. How do you integrate these various entities into the system? But hey, if you didn't orchestrate that network, you're going to be overwhelmed by what's happening in those countries. Fixed or flexible networks. What does a fixed network give you? You have your people, your company, your operations. What does it provide you? Provides you control, right? I can trust my people. I know these people. But what does it not give you? It doesn't give you the access to the ins and outs of what's happening in these different countries. So you think about networks as symbiotic relationships with partners creating and sharing value. When I think about value, I think about two kinds of things. Being a marketing professor, I think about value to the customer, and I think about value to the shareholders. And you need this sort of interlinkage with existing networks. It's not easy to work with people that you don't quite know. You need local sort of talent. You need local infrastructure. For networks to be sustaining, equitable, and not necessarily equal rent sharing. The tension that happens between companies, corporate offices in the United States and offices in 150 countries is what happens to equity. For example, markets in the United States are stagnant. They are large markets, but the growth rates are small. Markets elsewhere, the base is small, the growth rates are tremendous. So there's an intrinsic power play between managers elsewhere and managers in Round Rock or Houston or Dallas or New York City, which is, who has the power? My markets are growing. I need to be sort of getting the important attention. Networks have varying degrees of flexibility. In fixed networks, you make idiosyncratic investments. Entry costs are high, switching costs are high, and you have non-compete agreements. 1977 in India, there was a change of government. And I think the government that came in suddenly decided that people shouldn't be drinking Coca-Cola or they shouldn't be buying computers from IBM. What happened? Overnight, these companies had to leave. It's unlikely that those kinds of regime changes will happen again, but hey, you never know because there's a lot of internal domestic stuff that's happening in different countries that really has sort of collateral effects on companies entering in the marketplace. Flexible networks, on the other hand, you have contract agreements, you dissolve and reconstitute. The problem with flexible networks is you don't have control. You're going to work at the mercy of your network partners. Establishing trust sort of is a big issue. I wanted to show this to you from the Gap website. So this was on the Gap website, and it's basically talking about Gap and Bangladesh. So now you have a country, apparently, which is responsible in some level for the way Gap's social responsibility behavior is. Again, you can't read it, but I'm going to sort of show what Gap. This is from October 2013. It's on their website. You can pick it up. Gap cares about the health and safety of workers in our supply chain. We are deeply saddened by the tragic fire. There was a fire, I think about 800, 1,000 people died. So Gap was sort of forced to come out and make a statement. So what kind of a network was Gap using? A really flexible network. Many, many links between Gap and the factory that was making the garments where working conditions were subpar, right? So why does Gap have this flexible arrangement? For the reason that I just spoke about. I want to be able to really understand. I don't know how to manage Bangladeshi workers. I will get local people to work. What else? If I were to employ them, I'd have to pay minimum wages, and US wages, there's all kinds of conflicts of interest. The reason I'm going there is to get low costs, right? So what's happening here is you go there for the flexible network, and what happened? There was a fire. How was it known that Gap was involved? There was no paperwork linking Gap to this garment manufacturer. They found Gap labels on the store. Where the fire was happening, they found a bunch of Gap garment labels. The same thing with Walmart. Promoting responsible sourcing in Bangladesh, right? So you go to these countries, you have had an arrangement, you have what I called a flexible network that gives you distance between yourself and the actors in these countries, but you are in some way responsible for what happens. right? You may also be responsible for what happens, A, because they're making products for you. 2, it's also because Gap and Walmart have balance sheets and annual reports that are very public. Everybody knows that they have money. And why do robbers rob banks? Because, there's money there, right? So there's a reason why all this is happening. You go there to get the benefits. You use flexible networks because you want to have some degree of control and be efficient. So what happens now? You have both control and empowerment. Companies are now responsible for factories they don't own, employees they do not hire, and environments they don't necessarily operate in, right? And if a violation occurs anywhere in the world, consumers and the media may know about it everywhere, often before the companies themselves, because of this sort of multiple steps in the value chain. Key responsibility for the entire network, including rigorous compliance auditing, prevention, inspection, training, and other levers are needed to achieve this goal. But usually, it's probably too little too late, because you wait, something like this blows up, and then everybody scrambles, but there's sort of a huge cost to these networks. Building around the consumer, right? Why do companies chase these large markets? Countries like China with a 1.3 billion, or India with 1.2, or some numbers there around those. The exact numbers keep changing depending on when they release the statistics. What happens? These markets are very, very large. The middle class in India, depending on how you define the middle class, is between 400 million to 600 million. That's huge. They all don't have the money to buy all the products that companies have to offer them. And as we speak at this time, both China, India, Brazil, all of these countries, maybe not so much Brazil, they're all going through some internal, dissension. There's problems there. But hey, consumers exist. And they have very large youth populations. Just to go back again to WhatsApp, Facebook has 17% of the US population 18 to 24. WhatsApp has 85% of the population between 18 to 24 in the markets that they operate in, like China, India, and the United States. Why are companies clamoring after the 18s to 24s and not people like you and me so much? Right? I hope there are not that many 18-year-olds in this audience. Why is that? Because these folks have money, and they're the ones looking to buy goods and services, which is what is of interest to marketers, right? Freed from owning factories, the orchestrator can create the supply chain and the business around the customer. So, companies go where customers exist. They have to create buying power. How do they create buying power for the millions of customers outside the United States? By making products there. By making products there, you are employing people there, and customers follow factories. Customers follow manufacturing. Companies and their customers are bound by thick connections, a combination of human relationships, business processes, and technology. So while the countries themselves may not be engaged as much, customers in different countries are engaged closely with international and multinational brands. The world's most valued brand. What's that brand? Apple. Second most valued brand, Coca-Cola. If you look at the list of the top 20 brands in the world, 15 of them are US brands, right? What does a valued brand mean? It means the extent to which customers are willing to buy from the brand and pay a premium, as reflected in the net present value of the future cash flows derivable from the brand. So these customers offer companies a great way to leverage the equity of their brands. Anticipating customers. A customer in New York City is not the same as a customer in Austin, Texas. Clearly not the same as somebody in Beijing. So how do you respond and anticipate to customers and anticipate their needs? Think about the challenge again. It is really difficult for US companies to give up their control, like I said, from Round Rock or Dallas or Houston to markets elsewhere. Rapid commoditization, demanding faster innovation to keep up with changing consumer tastes. Intellectual property protection regimes are weak and pretty much non-existent in many countries. The first person who buys an Apple smartphone, as soon as it's released, the new version is probably Samsung, LG, HTC, because they're breaking it up and they're going to reverse engineer and come back. Even in domains where you think intellectual property protection should work, and they should work very well, for example, in RX pharmaceutical drugs, US companies find it really difficult to enforce intellectual property rights. So this is a huge challenge, which is how do you chase these customers, protect your technology, even as you know that those markets are not going to be protecting the intellectual property you develop. It's a really interesting situation of constraining companies in terms of what's possible. What's an arsenal for US companies? I'm going to take a US-centric view for the next 10 minutes, if I haven't already taken it, which is it's brands. It's the strength of customer relationships. So one question that I have in my class, and sometimes I teach students from China and students from India, and I'll put up this, top 20 brands. Top 20 brands, I believe about 14 or 15 are US brands. Starbucks, Pepsi, Intel, and you will see every once in a while a brand from Europe. And you see the German car companies, the Toyotas and the Hondas. And so a question that I ask, and I don't know if it is even a relevant question, but a question that I ask is, so now we are in 2014, look forward to 2044, 30 years from now, do you think there will be a Chinese or an Indian brand in that list? Right? I'm not sure, I don't know the answer to that question because we don't know, things might change. I mean, we'd be foolish to think we can predict the future that way because just look back on what's happened in the last 10 years in terms of technology and markets. Clearly, we couldn't see what was coming, but knowing what we know right now, I think the strength and the power of US corporations in markets outside, and I'm not talking about not having supply chain efficiencies or not controlling resources, all that's important. Taken all that as given, ceteris paribus, given all that is the same, what's going to offer a competitive advantage is the US brands. Brands have a cachet that allows companies to get increased sales, higher premiums, customer loyalty, even when technology rights are not being enforced, even when there's imitation. Why do people want to pay $2,000 for a Coach bag when they can go to Chinatown and get not the same, a similar looking bag for $60, right? So it's the value of the brand. Of course, I'm a biased marketing professor, and I think marketers create brands, so I have sort of my my vested self-interest. It's democratizing the network, pooling demand from customers all over the world. The fastest growing market for General Motors today is in China. In fact, they sell more cars in China than they sell in the United States. And that's the way it ought to be because, hey, the numbers are there. Remember I said 7 billion, 325 million. Access to customers. The network's partners give access to high premium customers, otherwise not possible. Yes, customers will come for your brands, but in order to make the brands accessible, you need to know the local institutional settings. Access to knowledge, latest knowledge about processes, materials, so they can benefit from being in the network. There are situational and institutional norms and mores that you're not sort of aware of. Demand smoothing because a larger market with more diverse customers. Best Buy. 60% of Best Buy sales occurs in the last 3 months. Right? If you are Best Buy, it's something that you want to think about. It's not necessarily the best way to go because you have a lot of inventory carrying costs. I mean, they have other problems as well with respect to the internet and showrooming. But just think in terms of seasonality. There's a big issue there. So if you are operating in multiple markets, when it's winter here, it's summer there. There's all kinds of, there are different festivals, seasons, all kinds of reasons why people shop at different points in the year. Financing, supporting from downstream customer firms with deep pockets. Many companies now in these emerging markets, because they're serving untapped needs for years, these markets have not got free market sort of situations. There are lots of really big, rich companies in these different countries. And if you partner with these companies, you're going to have access to their resources. So the development of factories in emerging markets is the precursor to the rapid growth of consumer markets. So Dell sets up an operation in India. They hire 5,000 people. These 5,000 people are getting salaries. Now they want to go and buy pizzas and cars and perfumes and bags and everything else, right? Clearly that has sort of a negative effect on the US market, but some of this is inexorable. It's just going to happen. Sourcing can offer insights into drivers of markets, into regulations, competition, and consumer behaviors. How can you understand markets you don't exist in? Operating in those markets, sending your own expat managers there will tell you about what those markets are like, what consumers want, what the infrastructure is, and how you can leverage your sourcing activities to build consumer business. So when you think about sourcing, what's the objective in sourcing? I want to get a lower priced product. And that's good, because everybody wants to save costs. Why pay more if you can get something for cheap? At the same time, as you're sourcing, you are building markets for other companies. Because where you're sourcing, customers are getting the funds in order to go out and buy your other products. So this sort of summarizes, and I'm not sure how I'm doing as far as time is concerned. Yes. Is it 9:35, Kerry? Yeah, so I will probably stop here. And maybe this summarizes what I wanted to tell you folks, and maybe take a few questions if any of you have any questions. Thank you so much. Thanks for your patience in listening. Does anybody have any questions or? Yes? Right. I think, again, I think it's going to be sector specific. So did you want to give me a sector to address?
Walmart and our chief of marketing in the U.S. just moved over to China. So I'm interested from your point of view in the classroom, what three things you focus on in U.S. companies.
Right. So the first thing I think, and this is going to be so counter to what we do in the US, we get so used, we are really spoiled. I guess by now we all know that in many ways. The first thing is the regulatory environment. I think the whole, and they play such an important role. I mean, it's, who's calling the shots, which government is doing what. I think that's sort of the first big thing. The second big thing is, I think, even as customers in these emerging markets want to have a relationship with the brand, I am seeing more and more that they have a love-hate relationship with the United States. Many citizens in these countries, and a lot of this is fueled by local politics, exigencies of the situation. So in some senses, there has to be a fine treading of the muscularity of the brands. I just told you, the US brands, the companies of US brands, the top 20 brands, they're really strong. So they're really muscular brands. The brands do have a lot of staying power, and they do have a lot of cachet, but at the same time, in the way the strategy is implemented, one has to be extremely sensitive to the fact that at any time things can change, and suddenly there'll be this, we love US brands, we don't like Americans. Something like that. Or we like Americans on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but not on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. It's something, I'm being facetious, to make a point, but I think folks have not sort of sorted out how they feel about the United States and the US brands. I mean, I think they like a lot, and there are things that they don't like. And this is probably not news to some of you. Maybe you've thought about this, and there is a certain amount of envy, or you have it all good. So the regulation would be the first thing, the regulatory environment, and I know I've been following what Walmart has been doing in India. They've really sort of tried. They come in, they go out. The second thing would be to sort of be sensitive to the fact that consumers, while they want and they patronize US brands, small things can set them off in terms. And the third, I think, would be this distribution challenges. There are many small villages in India where you can get Pepsi and Coke, but you don't get clean potable water. It's a fact. If you haven't guessed by now, I'm originally from India, so I can say this, and I mean it's shameful at some level because the government cannot provide. So there's a distribution issue. So I would think that these are the three. I'm not sure if they are the top three, but they come to mind at this time. The regulatory environment, sensitivity to customers having sort of mixed, ambivalent views to US and US brands. They love US brands, not so sure about US. And the third would be the distribution, the sheer distribution challenges of operating in markets like that. Yes?
Where are we going to be in 20 years with the popularity of online ordering? Where are we going to be with the traditional
Grocery?
buy stores and things like that? Is that going to just go away?
It's actually a good question, and I'm going to attempt to answer it. I would encourage all of you to be skeptical about my answer because it's really difficult to predict, but I'll give you what I think. I remember 1999. I graduated from Penn State in 2000, and I remember that was the NASDAQ tech boom. For some of you who remember that, you remember the pets.com, and we had a whole series of, and I think the rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated, right? So I think there was a sense that brick and mortar stores, as we knew it, was going away in 99. So the answer to your question is, I think going forward, I think online is going to continue to grow more and more, but I think there will be a role for brick and mortar, and I think the brick and mortar stores have to integrate online into their system. Let me give you an example. I went to Macy's over the weekend, and I didn't get my size. So I was, thinking, and I told my husband, I said, why don't they have a counter here that says, here's where you can go and place an order for your size? But instead, I had to go to the web, and I did order it. So I think there's going to be more integration. The extent to which they can be seamless. I don't think they can be truly seamless. So what does this mean, right? So I spoke about a company, Best Buy, right? So you think about Best Buy. I'm not sure, what's going to happen to Best Buy, the company. It may evolve. It may change in some ways. But I think there are going to be malls. There will be, there will be the brick and mortar stores. Their roles might kind of change. I think Gap is already doing what I'm suggesting, what you're talking about. So how do you sort of integrate that rather than seeing it as a threat, but something that you can leverage? Easier said than done. And the reason I say it's easier said than done is if you're an incumbent, if you're a brick and mortar store, and I'm a brick and mortar manager, I don't want to have online because I don't have capabilities in that domain. Do you remember a company called Kodak? Anyone? Rochester, New York, right? What happened to Kodak? It's a classic incumbent story. They invented digital cameras. They were the company that introduced the first digital cameras in 1981, I think. Was it? Yeah. What did they do with the camera? They threw it into the Atlantic Ocean because they were so scared that it would destroy their current model, right? So yeah, the brick and mortar stores, I think they will continue to stay at some level. Some of this is going to go to, moving forward because of the convenience of online. Yes? For years. Right. And I think, companies like Nordstrom are exactly capitalizing on that, right? And you're absolutely right. I think there was an emphasis on bottom line, which is like, let's cut people out. Let's cut people out. So not everybody can offer a Nordstrom level service because there isn't, a market for that. The market is very heterogeneous in terms of what they expect. But you're right. I think there is an opportunity for actors. Yes? Right, right. And I think that's a really good point because many systems, the reason they don't work the way they're supposed to is because of incentives. If the store manager is just responsible for sales, it's not clear. Of course, it's easy, for us to talk about changing incentive systems. But yes, I think that's part of the problem, which is how can you make the incentives less perverse? I think Galen wants me to stop. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the beautiful weather outside. Thank you.